He woke up screaming again. The sound tore through the dimly lit chamber like a blade, echoing off the smooth alloy walls. Every instinct in his body screamed that he was under attack, that the sky was burning, that the ground itself was collapsing beneath him, that the humans had come back. But there was no battlefield. Only the cold, sterile silence of the recovery ward. Commander Ruthkale of the Tharvian Dominion lay tangled in his own restraints, chest heaving, 4 eyes wide and unfocused. The bioluminescent veins beneath his dark skin pulsed erratically, flickering between violet and sickly white, signs of extreme distress. Around him, the medical drones activated instantly. Subject experiencing another episode, one of them chirped in a neutral tone. Another drone extended a slender arm, releasing a mist of calming agents into the air. Heart rate exceeds safe parameters. Neural activity spiking. Administer sedation. No, Ruthkale roared, his voice raw, scraping through his throat. No sedation. Not again. The drones paused. Their programming flickered between obedience protocols and medical necessity. Subject refusal noted, one said finally. The chamber door slid open. High Physician Varian entered, robes whispering softly against the floor. Her gaze was steady, but not unkind. She had seen this before, not just in Ruthkale, but in dozens of others who had survived the human front lines. Few came back unchanged. Fewer still came back sane. You're awake, she said calmly. Ruthkale let out a hollow laugh, one that didn't carry humor so much as exhaustion. I never left, he whispered. Varian approached slowly, dismissing the drones with a gesture. They retreated to the walls, silent observers. Another nightmare? She asked. Ruthkale didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted upward, as if he could still see something burning above him. They weren't nightmares, he said at last. They were memories. Varian had expected that answer. They're over now, she said gently. You're safe. The war ended cycles ago. At that, something in Ruthkale snapped. Safe, he hissed, his voice trembling. You think this is safety? His restraints creaked as he struggled against them, not to escape, but as if trying to claw his way out of his own skin. You weren't there, he said. You didn't see what they did. Varian remained silent, encouraging, waiting. Ruthkale's breathing slowed, but only slightly. His eyes dimmed to a dull violet, the color of dread. We thought they would break, he began. And just like that, the war returned. The Dominion had never lost a war. For over 3,000 cycles, the Tharvian fleets expanded across the galaxy, conquering, assimilating, or erasing every species that stood in their path. Their strategy was flawless, their technology unmatched, their soldiers genetically engineered for efficiency and obedience. When they first discovered Earth, it seemed like just another primitive world. A divided species, limited technology, endless internal conflict. Perfect. Humans are disorganized, the analysts had said. Emotionally unstable, militarily inefficient. They will surrender within one planetary rotation, others added. Ruthkale had believed it. He had led the first invasion fleet personally. A show of force, nothing more. A demonstration to remind the galaxy why the Dominion was feared. They entered Earth's orbit with overwhelming power. Orbital cannons locked onto major cities. Dropships filled the skies. Broadcasts were sent in every known frequency. Surrender, the message declared. Your world now belongs to the Tharvian Dominion. There was no reply. For a moment, Ruthkale had thought their communication systems had failed. Then the humans responded, not with surrender, but with fire. They hit us before we even landed, Ruthkale whispered, his voice barely audible. Varian leaned closer. How? She asked. Ruthkale let out a shaky breath. They shouldn't have been able to. The Dominion's ships were shielded against every known form of attack. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything the humans possessed. And yet, they fired projectiles, he said. Primitive, unguided, inefficient. He paused. And they still hit us. It made no sense. Their calculations had been perfect. Their trajectories flawless. But the humans didn't follow logic. They weren't aiming at where we were, he said. They were aiming at where we would be. Anticipation, prediction, instinct. The first Dominion cruiser exploded before it even fully entered atmosphere. Then another, and another. They learned us in minutes, Rithkale said. Minutes. Varine frowned slightly. That's not possible. Rithkale gave her a hollow smile. Exactly. The ground war was worse. Much worse. We expected organized resistance, Rithkale said. Structured defenses. Predictable tactics. What they found instead was chaos. Humans didn't fight like any species the Dominion had encountered. They didn't hold positions. They didn't follow patterns. They didn't retreat when logic dictated they should. They fought like they wanted to die, Rithkale said, his voice shaking. Varine said nothing. They would charge our lines with no regard for survival, he continued. They would destroy their own positions just to take a few of us with them. His hands trembled. We couldn't understand it. Dominion soldiers were trained to preserve themselves. Efficiency above all. Every life was a calculated asset. But humans, they turned themselves into weapons, he said. Explosives strapped to their bodies. Vehicles rigged to detonate. Entire squads sacrificing themselves to delay a single advance. It wasn't strategy, Rithkale said. It was madness. But it worked. We adapted, Rithkale said after a long silence. Of course they did. The Dominion always adapted. They recalibrated their tactics, adjusted their algorithms, improved the predictive models. They began to counter human strategies. Losses stabilized. Victory seemed inevitable again. And then they changed, he said. Varine's eyes narrowed slightly. Changed how? Rithkale's voice dropped to a whisper. They learned faster than we did. It wasn't just adaptation. It was evolution. Every battle, every encounter, every loss, the humans absorbed it all. They studied us, he said. Not just our tactics, our thinking. They began to anticipate Dominion strategies before they were even executed. They set traps that shouldn't have been possible. They knew what we were going to do, Rithkale said. Before we did. Varine shook her head slightly. That's not rational. No, Rithkale agreed. It wasn't. The worst part wasn't their weapons. It wasn't their tactics. It was their will. They didn't stop, Rithkale said. No matter how many cities were destroyed. No matter how many lives were lost. No matter how hopeless the situation became. They kept fighting. Varine studied him carefully. Every species resists, she said. That's not unique. Rithkale looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since he woke. No, he said quietly. They don't. He leaned forward as much as the restraints allowed. They break, he said. Eventually, they all break. But humans, they didn't. Not once. Not ever. There was a moment, Rithkale said. His voice had changed. Quieter now. Colder. I thought we had won. They had taken a major human stronghold. A city. One of their last. Resistance had been fierce, but it was finally over. The Dominion forces secured the area. Victory was declared. And then, Rithkale said, we heard it. Varine tilted her head slightly. Heard what? Rithkale's eyes flickered. Laughter. It didn't make sense. The city was in ruins. Their forces had been decimated. There was nothing left to fight for. And yet, they were laughing, he said. From the rubble. From the shadows. From everywhere. It wasn't fear, he whispered. It wasn't desperation. It was something else. Something worse. They were enjoying it. Varine felt a chill. That's impossible. Rithkale shook his head slowly. I thought so too. The counterattack came moments later. Not organized. Not strategic. But devastating. They came out of nowhere, Rithkale said. Wounded. Broken. Outnumbered. And unstoppable. They fought like they had nothing left to lose. Because they didn't. They took back the city in less than a cycle, he said. The Dominion forces were annihilated. Rithkale barely escaped. I lost everything that day, he said. His fleet. His soldiers. His certainty. The war dragged on. What was supposed to be a swift conquest turned into a prolonged nightmare. Losses mounted. Morale collapsed. And still, they didn't stop, Rithkale repeated. Eventually, the Dominion did something it had never done before. They withdrew. Not a strategic retreat, not a repositioning, a full withdrawal. They let the humans live, Varian said softly. Rithkale let out a bitter laugh. No, he said, they let us leave. Silence filled the chamber. Varian studied him carefully. The war is over, she said. Humans have not expanded beyond their system. They've made no attempt to pursue us. Rithkale closed his eyes. They don't need to, he said. Why? His eyes opened again, and for the first time, there was something else in them. Not fear, not pain, something deeper. They won. Another silence. He exhaled slowly. You want to know why I wake up screaming? He asked. Varian didn't answer. He continued anyway. It's not the battles, he said. Not the destruction, not even the losses. He swallowed hard. It's what I saw at the end. Varian leaned in slightly. What did you see? Rithkale's voice dropped to a whisper. A human. Just one. Standing on the battlefield. Wounded. Bleeding. Barely alive. He looked at me, Rithkale said. And he smiled. Varian frowned. Why is that significant? Rithkale's entire body tensed. Because we had already won that battle, he said. There was no hope left. No reinforcements. No escape. He paused. And he still smiled. Varian said nothing. He knew he was going to die, Rithkale continued. He knew everything was lost. Quote. His voice cracked. And he didn't care. A long, heavy silence followed. Finally, Varian spoke. What did it mean? Rithkale looked at her, and this time, there was no hesitation. It meant, he said slowly, that we never had a chance. The chamber fell quiet again. The drones remained still. The lights dimmed slightly, as if the room itself understood the weight of what had been said. Varian straightened, her expression unreadable. You're recovering, she said. It will take time. Rithkale didn't respond. He simply stared at the ceiling. Varian turned to leave. At the door, she paused. One last question, she said. Rithkale didn't look at her. What? Varian hesitated. Just for a moment. Would you fight them again? For a long time, there was no answer. Then, no. The word came without hesitation. Without doubt. Without fear. And somehow, that made it worse. That night, Rithkale slept. And for the first time in many cycles. He didn't dream. Because somewhere, deep inside him, he already knew the truth. If the humans ever came for them, there would be no waking up. The silence didn't last. It never did. 3 cycles after Rithkale's final outburst, the Dominion High Council convened in absolute secrecy. No public records. No transmissions. No observers outside the highest clearance tiers. War had ended, but fear had not. They're watching us. The words hung in the vast chamber like a toxin. High strategist Kelvorn stood at the center, his tall frame rigid, his voice controlled, but barely. Around him, the ruling minds of the Tharvian Dominion listened in strained silence. That is speculation, one counselor replied sharply. Humanity has not left their system. Our deep space probes confirm it. Kelvorn's gaze shifted, slow and deliberate. Do they? He asked. A flicker of unease passed through the chamber. We have no evidence to suggest otherwise, another counselor said, though his voice lacked conviction. Kelvorn activated the central display. A projection filled the air. Deep space. Silent. Endless. And then, a signal. Faint. Irregular. Human. We detected this transmission 2 cycles ago, Kelvorn said. The chamber stilled. It originated beyond the Sol system, he continued. Far beyond. That's impossible, someone whispered. Kelvorn didn't respond. Instead, he let the signal play. At first, it sounded like static. Then, something else. A pattern, a rhythm, and beneath it, laughter. Rithkale didn't hear the signal. Not directly, but he felt it. The moment it was played within Dominion space, something deep inside his mind stirred, like an old wound being torn open. He woke again. Not screaming this time. Worse. He woke. Calm. Too calm. The medical drones detected the change immediately. Subject neural activity stabilized. Emotional variance minimal. Abnormal. The chamber door opened. Varian entered quickly, her usual composure replaced with urgency. What happened? She asked. Rithkale sat upright. No restraints strained. No panic in his movements. Only stillness. They've started, he said. Varian's eyes narrowed. Started what? Rithkale turned to her slowly. The next phase. You're not making sense, Varian said. But there was something in her voice now. Not dismissal. Not certainty. Something closer to doubt. Rithkale stood from his resting platform. The drones hesitated, but didn't intervene. For the first time since his return, he didn't look broken. They never intended to stay contained, he said. That's an assumption, Varian replied. No, he said. That's a mistake we already made once. He began pacing slowly, measured, deliberate. You think the war ended because they stopped, he continued. It did, Varian said. Our forces withdrew. They did not pursue. Rithkale stopped. They didn't need to, he said again. Varian felt a chill crawl beneath her skin. You said that before, she said. Explain it. Rithkale looked at her, and this time, he did. They were never fighting to win, he said. Varian frowned. That contradicts everything you've told me. No, Rithkale said quietly. It completes it. He stepped closer. When we invade a world, we conquer it. We break it. We make it ours. Varian nodded slightly. That is the nature of war. Rithkale's expression darkened. Not for them. He paused. They fight to change the enemy. Varian blinked. What? Rithkale's voice lowered. They weren't trying to defeat us, he said. Not completely. Quote. He gestured toward himself. They were teaching us. The chamber felt smaller suddenly. Heavier. Varian's mind raced, trying to follow. That's illogical, she said. Rithkale shook his head. It's efficient. Varian stared at him. Explain. Rithkale exhaled slowly. They showed us everything, he said. Their tactics, their resilience, their refusal to break. His eyes dimmed. They made sure we understood. Understood what? Varian asked. Rithkale didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was almost a whisper. That fighting him is a mistake. High strategist Kelvorn stood before the council once more. The signal is not random, he said. It repeats every 12 cycles. The pattern is intentional. Decoded? A counselor asked. Partially, Kelvorn replied. He hesitated, which, in itself, was enough to unsettle the room. Well, another demanded. Kelvorn activated the display again. The signal played. Static. Rhythm. And then, a translation. Not perfect, but clear enough. We remember. The chamber fell into stunned silence. That could mean anything, one counselor said quickly. Kelvorn didn't look at him. It could, he agreed. He paused. Or it could mean exactly what it sounds like. They don't forget, Rithkale said. Varian stood motionless. Every loss, he continued. Every battle, every death. His gaze drifted slightly, as if seeing something far away. They carry it with them. Varian crossed her arms. That's not unique. Rithkale's eyes snapped back to her. Yes, he said. It is. He stepped closer. Other species remember strategically, he said. They archive data. They analyze outcomes. He leaned in slightly. Humans remember personally. The words settled like a weight. They don't just learn from war, he continued. They feel it. The first confirmed sighting came shortly after. A Dominion outpost, far beyond the core systems. Minimal defenses. No strategic value. It should have been insignificant. And yet, it vanished. No distress signal. No debris. No energy signatures. Just gone. Kelvorn reviewed the data himself. There should be something, he muttered. There isn't, his aide replied. Kelvorn's eyes narrowed. Then they're already better than we thought. They've been preparing, Rithkale said. Varian shook her head. For what? They've shown no signs of expansion. Rithkale smiled faintly. A cold, knowing expression. That's exactly why you should be worried. The second signal was different. Stronger, closer, and this time, there was no static, no distortion, just a voice. Human, clear, calm. We remember, it said again. Then, we learned. Panic spread faster than any invasion ever could. The Dominion had faced countless enemies. But this was something else. They're escalating, Kelvorn said. No, another strategist argued. This could be psychological warfare. Kelvorn didn't respond immediately. Then, all warfare is psychological, he said. They're coming, aren't they? Varian's voice was quieter now. Less certain. Rithkale didn't answer right away. He walked to the chamber's observation panel. Looked out into the endless void beyond. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, yes. Estimated time, a counselor demanded. Kelvorn's expression didn't change. Unknown. That's unacceptable. It's accurate. Quote. Varian stepped closer to Rithkale. If they're coming, she said, we need to prepare. Rithkale nodded slowly. Yes, he said. A pause. Then, but not for war. Varian frowned. Then for what? Rithkale turned to her, and for the first time since she had met him, there was no fear in his eyes. Only certainty. For survival. The third signal arrived without warning. No delay. No build-up. It appeared across every Dominion frequency simultaneously. Impossible to block. Impossible to ignore. This time, there was no laughter, no distortion, no ambiguity. Just a single message. We are not coming to conquer. A pause. Long enough for hope to flicker. Then, we are coming to finish what you started. Rithkale didn't wake up screaming that night. He didn't wake at all. Because somewhere, deep in the silence between stars, the humans had already crossed the distance. And this time, they weren't teaching. They were answering. The stars did not scream. They went quiet. Across the Dominion, long-range sensors, designed to detect supernovae, gravitational anomalies, fleet movements spanning entire sectors, began reporting the same impossible phenomenon. Absence. Not the absence of data. The absence of something that should have been there. Background radiation has decreased, one analyst said, his voice unsteady. That's not possible, another replied immediately. It's a constant. It was asterisk, the first said. Silence followed, because the numbers did not lie. Something vast was moving, and where it passed, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. They've entered. High strategist Kelvorn didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The chamber felt it. Every mind present understood the weight behind those two words. How many? A counselor asked. Kelvorn hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than any answer. We don't know. That's not acceptable. It's accurate. A flicker of irritation rippled through the council. You're telling us an entire invading force has entered our territory and we can't even quantify it. Kelvorn turned slowly. I'm telling you, he said, that whatever just crossed into our space is not behaving like a fleet. Rithkale felt it before the alarms reached him. A pressure, not physical, not entirely mental, something deeper, something instinctive. He stood at the observation panel again, staring into the void. They're here, he said quietly. Varian stood beside him now, not behind, not observing, but present. What do you see? She asked. Rithkale didn't blink. Nothing, he said. A pause. That's what's wrong. The first world to go dark wasn't a military stronghold. It wasn't a strategic hub. It wasn't even defended. A civilian colony. Population. 3 million. Atmospheric conditions stable. No signs of conflict. No distress call. At exactly 3:17 Dominion Standard Time. It vanished. Not destroyed. Not invaded. Not even altered. Scans showed empty space. Where a world had been. There was nothing. That's impossible. It happened. No weapon can. We're past. No weapon can. Kelvorn snapped. The chamber fell silent again. Data streamed across the central display. Sensor logs. Quantum readings. Gravitational echoes. Every piece of information pointed to the same conclusion. They didn't destroy it, Kelvorn said slowly. Then what did they do? Someone asked. Kelvorn didn't answer, because for the first time in his long career, he didn't know. They're not attacking, Varine said. Her voice was tight, controlled, but strained. Rithkale nodded. Yes, he said. That's worse. Varine turned to him. How can that be worse? Rithkale finally looked at her. Because it means they're choosing. The second world disappeared 6 hours later. This time, there were witnesses. A nearby outpost recorded the event. The footage was transmitted directly to the High Council. And then, to every level of command. Because hiding it would have been pointless. The recording began normally. A distant view of the colony. Stable, peaceful. Then, the stars behind it dimmed. Not eclipsed, not blocked, dimmed, as if something vast and unseen had stepped between reality and the light itself. The colony shimmered, just for a moment, and then, it was gone. No explosion, no debris, no energy discharge, just absence. They're erasing us. The words slipped out before anyone could stop them. And once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. Kelvorn didn't correct it, because he had already thought the same thing. Rithkale closed his eyes. They learned more than tactics, he said. Varine's voice was barely audible. What does that mean? Rithkale exhaled slowly. It means we taught them how we think. He opened his eyes again. And now they're using it against us. Panic spread. Not in waves. Not gradually. Instantly. Systems failed. Not physically, but structurally. Command chains broke. Orders contradicted each other. Entire fleets repositioned without coordination. Because for the first time in Dominion history, there was no strategy, no model, no precedent. How do you fight something that doesn't fight? One commander demanded. No one answered. They're not here to conquer, Varine said. She was beginning to understand. Slowly, horribly, Rithkale nodded. I told you. Then what are they doing? She asked. Rithkale turned back to the stars. His voice dropped. They're finishing it. The third signal didn't come through channels. It came through everything. Every screen, every interface, every neural link, every device capable of receiving or displaying information. The Dominion didn't intercept it. They didn't decode it. They didn't even process it. Because it was already understood. A human stood on the screen. Not armored, not enhanced, just human. He looked tired, older than war should allow. Scars marked his face. One eye was gone, replaced with something artificial. But the other eye burned. He looked directly at them. Not at the camera, at them. We told you to leave, he said. His voice was calm, flat, controlled. You did. A pause. And that was the right choice. No one in the Dominion moved. No one spoke. No one even breathed. We learned a lot from you, the human continued. How you plan, how you calculate, how you decide who matters, and who doesn't. His gaze hardened, and we decided something too. A longer pause. This one heavy, deliberate. You don't get to do that anymore. They're judging us. The realization hit Varine like a physical force. Rithkale didn't deny it. Yes, that's not war, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. The human on the screen took a slow breath. We're not here to wipe you out, he said. A ripple of relief, fragile and desperate, passed through the Dominion. Then, we're here to make sure you can't do this to anyone else. The relief shattered instantly. How? Someone whispered. The human answered. By taking away your ability to choose war. The next disappearance wasn't a world. It was a fleet. An entire battle group. Thousands of ships. Millions of soldiers. Gone. Mid-transit. Recorded in real time. One moment, they existed. The next, they didn't. No transition. No warning. Just absence. Their targeting capability, Kelvorn said. His voice had changed. No longer commanding. No longer certain. Just aware. They're not erasing us randomly, he continued. They're removing our ability to fight back. Rithkale nodded slowly. They're disarming the galaxy. Varine stared at him. By erasing anything that can wage war. Yes, that includes us. Rithkale met her gaze. I know. Quote. Resistance was attempted. It had to be. The Dominion could not simply allow this. A coordinated strike was launched. Every remaining fleet, every weapon, everything they had left, they aimed at the source of the disturbances. At the regions where stars dimmed, where worlds vanished, where reality bent. They fired the largest barrage in Dominion history. Enough firepower to sterilize entire sectors. The result? Nothing. Not a miss. Not a deflection. Not even an impact. The weapons simply didn't arrive. They're not in the same space we are, Kelvorn said. Understanding dawned too late. They're operating above it. Rithkale felt it again. Stronger this time. Closer. They're here, he said. Varine looked around. There's nothing. There doesn't need to be. The final message came without warning. No signal. No broadcast. No transmission. It appeared everywhere. Not on screens. Not in systems. In minds. Clear. Unavoidable. Humanity was speaking. And this time, there was no intermediary. No more empires. The words echoed across billions of consciousnesses simultaneously. No more conquest. A pause. Then, no more you. Varine collapsed to her knees. Not from pain. From understanding. They're ending us, she whispered. Rithkale stood still. No, he said softly. They're ending what we are. The change didn't come as destruction. It came as removal. Weapons systems failed. Not damaged. Not disabled. Gone. Entire databases of military knowledge. Erased. Genetic modifications designed for warfare. Reverted. Ships would not respond to combat commands. Not malfunctioning. Refusing. As if the concept itself had been stripped from reality. They're rewriting us, Kelvorn said. His voice was hollow. They're removing our capacity for war. Rithkale exhaled slowly. They're finishing what they started on Earth. Varine looked up at him. What do you mean? Rithkale's gaze softened, just slightly. They taught us fear, he said. Now they're teaching us limits. Days passed, or something like days. Time felt unstable. The Dominion didn't fall. It changed. Systems reorganized. Priorities shifted. Not by command. Not by decision. By necessity. Without war, there was no empire. Only civilization. The human appeared one last time. Not in every mind. Just one. Rithkale's. He stood in the same place. Battle-scarred. Unbroken. You remember me? The human said. Rithkale nodded slowly. The battlefield, he said. You smiled. The human tilted his head slightly. You remember that? I do. A pause. Why? Rithkale asked. Why did you smile? The human was quiet for a moment. Then, because we already knew how it would end. Rithkale's voice was barely a whisper. And how does it end? The human looked at him. Not with hatred. Not with anger. With something far more unsettling. Certainty. You live, he said. A pause. But not like before. Rithkale woke up. No screaming. No panic. No fear. Just silence. Real silence. For the first time since the war began. His mind was quiet. Varine stood nearby, watching him. Well, she asked. Rithkale sat up slowly. They're done, he said. Varine exhaled. A long, trembling breath. Are we safe? Rithkale thought about it. Really thought. Then, yes. A pause. But we're not what we were. Varine nodded. I think that's the point. The stars returned. Background radiation normalized. The absence faded. Worlds stopped disappearing. Reality settled. The humans were gone. Or perhaps, they had simply stepped back. The Dominion no longer existed. Not as it had. Not as an empire. Not as a force. But something remained. Something quieter. Something different. And at the edge of known space. A single signal echoed. Not loud. Not threatening. Just present. We remember. Ruthkale stood beneath an open sky. A real one. Not simulated. Not artificial. For the first time in his life. He wasn't preparing for war. Varine stood beside him. What happens now? She asked. Ruthkale looked up at the stars. At the vast, silent universe. And for the first time, he didn't see enemies. I think, he said slowly, we learn how to live. Far beyond their reach, beyond their understanding. Humanity watched, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as something else entirely. Something the galaxy had never seen before. They had fought, they had endured, they had learned, and in the end, they had done the one thing no empire ever had. They had won, without becoming what they hated. And somewhere, on a quiet world called Earth, a soldier slept peacefully. No screams, no nightmares, because the war was finally over. Not just for humanity, but for everyone.